Okay, morning everybody. So we've had some wonderful talks with lots of data, so I'm going to lighten your morning with some speculation. And what I'm going to talk about today is the relationship between personality and mate choice, and how this relationship can drive macroevolutionary processes like speciation and hybridization. As we've seen in these past two talks, individual social behavior, individual mating decisions can underlie reproductive isolation or conversely genetic exchange between species. And we know intuitively from our own experience that personality has a lot to do with whether individuals get together or stay apart. Sheep and wolves are reproductively isolated, probably not because Howard worried excessively about what the pack would think, but it does bring home the point that behavioral isolation matters and the personality is a part of it. So I think most of us are familiar with the concept of sensory drive, with which Jenny Bowman articulated really nicely in a tree paper a few years back. Which has been shown by, among several others, Jenny and Jenny in sticklebacks and Ole Seehausen in cichlids. And the basic idea here is that peripheral sensitivity, the sensory envelope, can act as a magic trait, something that's under divergent ecological selection in different contexts, different microhabitats, but that's also involved in shaping mating decisions and can therefore serve to drive assortative mating. So it's a trait under divergent ecological selection that directly drives assortative mating. But we know, sticking with the cichlid example, that a lot of what's interesting about mate choice occurs beyond the sensory periphery. So while the sensory envelope shapes mating preferences, whether females prefer to mate with blue males or red males, this preference is contingent on social experience. So my former postdoc, Maktal Verzeiden, for her PhD work, showed that cross-fostering cichlids with parents of one or the other color could act to actually reverse preferences. Males that were raised with blue females preferred blue females as adults and vice versa. And the last couple decades have shown an explosion of studies that show that these mechanisms beyond the sensory periphery are dispositive to mate choice. And as we saw with Charles's talk, the key difference between the two strains of Drosophila in terms of their mating preference, in fact, has to do with a gene associated with synaptic plasticity in the brain. And so here's a sort of grocery list of mechanisms that are involved in mate choice, everything from working memory to associative learning to social affiliation. All of these mechanisms underlie how individuals express their preferences, everything from how choosy they are to what stimuli they prefer to the sensitivity of their decisions to the social environment and to social experience. And these decisions, in turn, can drive reproductive isolation or genetic exchange. And we can sort of put all of these mechanisms under the umbrella term of personality, in the sense that they underlie consistent differences among individuals in behavior that are stable over a relatively long time scales, and critically that are stable across contexts. And most of these contexts have nothing to do with mate choice. They are shaped by things like foraging strategies, by responses to predators, by social affiliation in non-sexual contexts, by dispersal into new environments, and so forth. So just like with sensory drive, ecological selection on these personality traits can shape mating preferences and therefore contribute to reproductive isolation. And there's a growing number of studies that are beginning to examine the link between personality and mate choice more explicitly. This is a paper by David and Cizii that came out a few years ago. where they measured the activity of zebra finches in a choice apparatus female zebra finches before stimulus males were presented, and females that were more exploratory in the pretrial phase, that spent more time checking out their environment and moving around the apparatus, were less choosy. They were less decisive when it came to making a mating decision, and they had weaker preferences. So exploratory behavior predicted both choosiness and the overall strength of preference. Now, we can also see that personality can have a more direct influence on mating decisions. So Schuett et al. Reviewed the studies to date on assortative mating by personality, and all but one of them showed positive assortative mating by personality. Individuals were more likely to pair, this was a socially monogamous species, with individuals like themselves than you would expect by chance. So shy individuals are more likely to have shy mates, anxious individuals are more likely to have anxious mates, etc. And a number of studies have shown that positive assortative mating by personality can have positive fitness consequences. So there's a study by Rangasamy and colleagues that I really liked that came out last year, where they experimentally manipulated pairs of a mound-building mouse. And what they found after measuring the personality of males and females, and what they found is that pairs that were more similar reproduced at a faster rate than pairs that were dissimilar. So what this means is that personality can act as a magic trait, right, directly. If pairs with one personality type, with compatible personality types, have higher fitness than with incompatible personality types, divergent selection on personality can lead to reproductive isolation. And more generally, so personality can be directly involved in pairing, as with assortative mating in monogamous species. But more generally, personality might affect how choosers respond to courtship signals. And one thing that hints at this is that individual preferences change with age. So in a couple of bird species, younger females are startled by high-intensity courtship displays, so they react negatively to really vigorous male motor patterns. As females age, however, their preferences change, and they prefer, possibly get habituated to these kinds of displays, and they prefer higher intensity displays. So this means that an individual's personality might determine their subjective experience with individual types of courtship. Individuals with certain personalities might respond positively to stimuli that individuals with other personalities would respond negatively to. And in turn, as Allison Bell and Andy C. suggest, selection might favor social skill, might favor courters, individuals who can flexibly adjust their courtship to match the personality of their target audience, as it were. And if we think about sort of the full scope of mate choice, a personality can have all kinds of carryover effects on mate choice. So Safi Darden had a really wonderful study a couple years ago showing that female guppies that grow up in an environment where they're harassed by males are less sociable with other females. They keep their distance from other females. And I don't think it's too much of a stretch to think that this could affect the influence of mate copying. In other words, how females are attending to public information, decisions of other females, in terms of making individual decisions. And what I want to talk about for most of the rest of the talk is the relationship between associative learning and personality. So in humans, personality predicts performance in associative learning. So impulsive people who are extroverted and bold, are better at learning through what's called appetitive conditioning. So positive stimuli, behaviors that are reinforced by positive experience. Whereas people who are higher on the anxiety scale, or who are shyer, are better at learning through aversive conditioning. So they respond better to negative stimuli, modifying their behavior as a consequence of interactions with negative stimuli. So what this means is that personality might affect how animals process, say, being accepted by conspecifics or being rejected by heterospecifics, like Rubidoux has shown in Drosophila. And we think something along this line might be going on in the system that my lab focuses on, and you've probably heard, I hope you've heard the talks on swordtails at this meeting. So we work on hybrid zones between these two species, Xiphophorus birchmani and Xiphophorus malinche. And these two species have divergent mating preferences. So Xiphophorus birchmani, this is preferences for visual traits, prefer conspecific visual signals. This is standard dichotomous choice assay. Females spend more time interacting with conspecific males than heterospecific males. The sister species, Xiphophorus malinche, also surprisingly has a preference for conspecific visual traits, for heterospecific visual traits. So they're, for the Mexicans in the audience, they're malinchistas. They reject the familiar stimuli in favor of unfamiliar stimuli, and either have no preference or a preference for birchmani. And these differences are paralleled by differences in personality. Xiphophorus birchmani is bold, and Xiphophorus malinche is mousy. If you can think of a better alliteration, I'll pay you $1. So we see differences on boldness or composite measures of latency to emerge and time away from shelter, etc. Just like with female darters, we cannot tell them apart in the lab morphologically, but we can tell them apart behaviorally. So this is a birchmani female. This is a track of where she's moving in a tank over 10 minutes. This is a malinche female. The birchmani explore the whole aquarium. The malinche hug the sides. And so this raises the question, okay, birchmani is bolder, they're more impulsive as it were, so are they shaping their preferences through appetitive learning, and are malinche, by contrast, shaping their preferences through avoidance learning? And this is work that, again, Maktal Verzeiden took the lead on, exposing females to adults of each species, starting at birth. And Xiphophorus birchmani show the classic Conrad-Lorenz imprinting syndrome. They prefer whatever they're exposed to. Birchmani, if they're exposed to birchmani, malinche if they're exposed to malinche. Malinche, however, show a more complicated combination of innate and learned preferences, but what I want to focus on is that exposure to birchmani causes aversion to birchmani. Familiarity breeds contempt. They're showing aversion learning here. So this is an N of 2, of course, but it suggests that different outcomes of early learning might be associated with different personality types. Now, because these fish hybridize, we can leverage the power of recombinant genomes to actually look at this at an individual level and understand genetic correlations between personality and mate choice. But we also think that personality is likely to play a role in driving hybridization itself. This is because environmental impacts are central to whether or not individuals hybridize or not. Everything from the sensory environment to the social environment to predation risk can affect hybridization, and all of these things are likely to interact with variation in personality. So just to wrap up, there's a ton of evidence that personality traits diverge due to ecological selection. Personality can potentially restrict gene flow through both divergent preferences as a consequence of personality and directly as a consequence of assortative mating by personality. Conversely, personality can bias the direction and likelihood of hybridization. All right, and I've got a book about this and lots of other stuff coming out next year. I don't have time for questions, but I'm happy to talk to anyone about this afterwards. Thank you very much.